please contact me. My email address is going on the chat, and I will be delighted to try and help you there. Finally, this is webinar format, so we unfortunately will not be able to hear from you directly. I do encourage you to use the chat, and there will be at the end a link to an evaluation form sent around, and we would be very glad to have your input and your feedback there for organising future fora. Without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Elizabeta Kitanovič, Executive Secretary at the Conference of European Churches, to open the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis, for your kind introduction, and thanks to all who have joined us over the course of the summer in working on recommendations for the G20 Interfaith Forum. I'm conscious that a great deal of work has been done by many of the foremost and busiest experts in Europe, and we are immensely grateful for the thoughts and efforts you have put into this project. I can assure you that there will be immensely helpful both in formulating final recommendations to go to the G20 summit leaders this year, and also for our continued work as we move towards next year's G20 Interfaith Forum, which will be held in Bologna in Italy. At this point, it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. He is Eminence Metropolitan Emmanuel of France. His Eminence Metropolitan Emmanuel Adamakis is the Metropolitan of the Orthodox Metropolis of France, Ecumenical Patriarchate, and the President of the Orthodox Episcopal Assembly in France. He is also co-president of the Council of Christian Churches in France, as well co-moderator of the World Conference of Religions for Peace. He also served as the Vice President and the President of the Conference of European Churches, and he is also chairman of the board of directors of KAICIID International Dialogue Center. He has been a major friend of the G20 Interfaith Forum for many years and has been with us from the beginning of the G20 European Regional Consultation of Interfaith Forum this summer. We are particularly grateful for his understanding of the process and his insight into the important roles that religious actors can play into G20 process. Your Eminence, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeta. Dear professors, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is in fact, once again, a great opportunity and a great joy for me on behalf of the organizing committee of the G20 Interfaith Forum in Europe to address you today. Many of you were here 2 months ago when we began this exciting process, and I'm delighted to be with you once again and to see it completed. And as many of you know, 3 working groups were launched in June to consider and produce recommendations for European religious and state actors under 3 topics set out by the G20 host of this year, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The first working group focused on empowering people and fostering gender equality. The second turned to safeguarding the planet. And the third examined a cluster of issues located in frontiers in the intersection of governance, faith, and technology. After a month of consultation and engagement of many, 3 discussion papers have been published on the G20 Interfaith Forum website in the hope that their contents may feed into the deliberations of the G20 Interfaith Forum in October 2020, and even the G20 Leaders Summit a month later. And I'm sincerely grateful to all of those who took part in these deliberations. The G20 Interfaith Forum has become a regular annual fixture alongside the G20 Religious Summit, and it's one among many admirable examples of a conversation and often collaboration between secular institutions and the world's religious community. And such a partnership has very different dynamics in different parts of the world. That is one reason why I find it recommendable that this year the G20 Interfaith Forum Association, working in close partnership with KAICIID International Dialogue Center, the UN Alliance of Civilizations, and the National Committee for Interfaith and Intercultural Dialogue in Saudi Arabia, has been fit to run regional consultations. And these have been well designed to capture concerns specific to the culture and economic circumstances of each area. In Europe, the European Union, the Council of Europe, the OSCE, and many other institutions, as well as governments at every level, have increased their efforts to dialogue with religious stakeholders. And this engagement has expanded in scope to cover aspects of education, policing, mediation, and peace building, to name just a few of them. SADO has been clear that a partnership between the sectors is vital, as this year with COVID-19 spread dramatically all over Europe and other parts of the world. And faith leaders joined or other frontline actors designing new community policies and practices to prevent the spread of infection and delivering crucial services to comfort and care for the sick and those who are vulnerable. This cooperation took countries' forms involving both great creativity and commitment, and deserves both to be praised and to be encouraged as we move into a still uncertain future. We have not, unfortunately, finished with the pandemic. Such interactions, however, are not always simple. And one of the major tasks of G20 Interfaith Forum, working along with other dialogue platforms, is to determine what has been done well, what can be done to be better, and where these have been shortfalls, the need of correction for the future. The contrast between religion and politics can sometimes provide healthy perspectives, providing inspiration and altruism, as well as ethical insight that can help develop new vision and energy for solving seemingly intractable problems. And at other times, their priorities appear incompatible. Differences in language, practices, and hierarchies make the two spheres seem completely mysterious to one another. The G20 Interfaith Initiative provides important context where inspiration and theory can be connected and practice, where differing religious orientations can become together in common viewpoints, and where faith initiatives can show their relevance to concrete policy formulation. And the G20 Interfaith Forum provides a context where religion can learn to speak the language of practical policy makers. As we, at the same time, I would say that it can promote dialogue, which can help secular,
We've lost you.
Sorry. Yes. At the same time, it can promote a dialogue which can help secular institutions see beyond stereotype images of religion that can impair building effective cooperation and partnerships that are vital if common problems are to be addressed in optimal ways. And the forum provides a setting in which diverse religious voices can come together to find practical solutions that can be shared with global leaders. And this is the purpose, actually, of this forum. Today, we are lucky to have a key experts here who will tell us a little about the process they went through to gather many voices into a combined product. We are honored that we have also important officials from the European Commission. And I hope that Mirco Tomasi, Policy Officer of G7 G20 of the European Commission, and Mr. Vincent Depeigne, Coordinator for the dialogue between the European Commission and churches and religious communities, associations, as well as philosophical and non-confessional organizations. And we welcome the opportunity from the religious side to enter into dialogue and discussion with them. And we hope such encounters will build relationships and bear long-term fruit. And we are appreciative to the work that the European Commission officials are doing to enhance the effectiveness of the G20 Leaders Summit. It is our hope that your frank feedback from the 2020 initiative, a pilot in terms of regional engagement, will allow us to improve our work next year when Italy will host the process and in subsequent years as well. And it is vital that we find ways to this to happen. Much has been achieved by common efforts, but so much more remains to be done. And we live at a time of unparalleled crisis. Climate change threatens life on planet Earth as we know it. Wars continue. Famine drives migration. Migration contributes to an increasingly pluralized social group, and the quest for dignity seems to proceed chaotically from all angles. The challenges of artificial intelligence are accelerating, and if all those challenges were not enough, the COVID-19 pandemic casts to pale over everything until everything seems out of joint. And yet, as serious as these problems are, none are genuinely new to religion. Religious communities are diverse and suggest partially different, partially similar answers to these challenges. This is as true in Europe as elsewhere, and we have hundreds of distinct faiths with communities ranging in age from thousands of years to mere years or decades, identifying authentic representatives, avoiding generalizations, protecting distinctive belief systems and identities, and finding ways to respect the dignity of difference. And these are all serious challenges, troublesome though they may be. And yet, dear friends, buried within this diversity are the seeds from which vision can take shape, common projects, and can emerge, and progress can be made. The goals which we are pursuing for the good of humanity are truly quite similar. And to this end, they are quite similar to the ends of politics as well. And what we urgently need to find are ways to put forward common solutions. Let us endure that this year and going forward, we are able to pull, if not on the same rope, then in the same direction and in time with one another as well. All the blessings for this meeting and for the meetings to come as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Eminence, by reminding us of the importance of cooperation between public sector officials and religious actors. You have reminded us of both the challenges and the promise of such a collaboration. This is a wonderful start for a session that exemplifies the efforts to bring the religious and policy world together. Our next speaker will be Mr. Mirco Tomasi, who is an economic analyst at the Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs of the European Commission, presently working as G7 and G20 desk assisting to Sherpa at European Commission and European Council. We are particularly fortunate to have Mr. Tomasi today with us. And from the beginning of the European regional consultation process this year, our aim has been to be able to interact with those directly working on formulating European policy for the G20 process. Mr. Tomasi comes from the very office responsible for shaping that policy. We accordingly view this session as an important opportunity for sharing perspectives, and we appreciate his willingness to join us today. We have already shared with him the recommendations prepared by our 3 working groups that Metropolitan Emmanuel mentioned. And he felt that he could help to us today by talking about policy priorities relevant to our recommendations. With that in mind, Mr. Tomasi, could I ask you to share with us, to the extent you can, an indication of what the European Union will do at the next G20 summit about climate change, anti-corruption, gender and structural inequalities, and continuing issues surrounding migration? Mr. Tomasi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone for the invitation. I hope you can hear and see me well. My camera seems to be blocked. I don't know if you can see me sufficiently well, and if you can hear me well. Can you nod if you do? Yeah.
We can certainly
Is that okay?
hear you.
Okay, good. So thank you again for the invitation. As Elizabeta said, I work as assistant to the G7 and the G20 Sherpas of the European Union, which for the moment are in the G7 the president of the cabinet of Charles Michel, and for the G20 is the president of the cabinet of Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, so Mr. Bjorn Seibert. So my role, together with my teammate, is that of assisting the work of the Sherpas in the preparation of the summits. We negotiate for them and with them the texts that will then need to be endorsed by the leaders, and of course we contribute to all the other deliverables of the G20 in the different ministerial tracks. So having said that, I'm very pleased to be talking to you today. This is not the first time that I participate in a meeting of a G20 engagement group, and for us it's always a pleasure to meet with the civil society, with the engagement groups of the G20, because they provide useful and fresh analysis and recommendations for the leaders and for the different ministerial tracks. As Elizabeta already said, I obviously cannot be the Sherpa and cannot provide you with the final positions of the EU in the matters that you have raised in your papers, but I can certainly address some of the issues that you mentioned in your papers, and I can illustrate a little bit what the next steps of the G20 will be from here to the summit, and what the position of the EU is with regard to the G20 agenda. So now the next step for the G20 will be the next G20 Sherpa meeting, where all the Sherpas will gather to discuss the first draft of the leaders' declaration. And the meeting is going to take place on the 29th and 30th of September this month, so really just a few days. We have already received a first draft of this declaration prepared by the Saudi presidency. It's already very well done, but obviously all the delegations have their own priorities to insert. So we anticipate there will be a lot of debates going on during the Sherpa meeting. After what will be the third Sherpa meeting. So this Sherpa meeting in September. We are going to have another Sherpa meeting to discuss the declaration at the end of October, and after that, by the end of November, there should be the summit with another Sherpa meeting to finalize the declaration just before the summit that is supposed to. Unless things change, because due to the COVID crisis, a lot of the dates have had to be changed. So if things don't change, the summit will take place on 21st, 22nd of November this year. What are the EU priorities this year in the summit? Well, I mean, as you can probably imagine, we started the year with a long list of priorities. And by March, we basically had to put them all in a drawer because of the COVID crisis that took the center stage. So we had to completely realign our policy agenda to deal with the contingency of the crisis, the epidemic, and the economic fallout, the health systemic risks that have come with the pandemic all over the globe. So for us, the first and foremost, the most important priority for the G20 is really to show unity, solidarity across the globe in fighting the pandemic, and provide some concrete answers to the need of the people throughout the planet. For us, this means, in very concrete terms, stepping up the efforts towards the development of a vaccine and all the necessary therapeutics and medicines that go with it, and to make sure not only that this vaccine is developed fast, but it is also universally affordable, especially for countries that cannot otherwise afford it. So we are really trying to make sure, with a series of initiatives in the WHO that you probably already have heard, that we make the vaccine readily available to all, especially the most fragile developing countries where this would not otherwise be the case. We have already done a lot, and we have already made some commitments at leaders level. You probably know that on the 26th of March there was an extraordinary leaders meeting of the G20 that set out some actions that needed to be fulfilled and implemented in the coming months. And following that, we developed a G20 Action Plan with a series of steps that the governments of the G20 members needed to take at different levels. And I mean, I think we as EU have really stepped up and put, let's say, our money where our mouth is, because immediately after that extraordinary leaders meeting, we started a pledging event. Coronavirus Global Response Pledging Summit is the name. Through which we gathered leaders of different countries, not only of the G20, but also personalities of the civil society, donors, etc., to try to gather resources to step up the investments into a vaccine for COVID. And I'm pleased to say that thanks to our efforts and the efforts of all the partners involved, we've managed to collect so far 18 billion euros. So as a second step, we engaged with our partners in the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator. That it's an initiative that is meant to step up the research and development of a vaccine, and it is co-hosted by several organizations, including the WHO. Then we worked with the finance ministers of all the G20 members to launch something that is extremely relevant for us, which is a debt suspension initiative, which would enable developing countries that have high foreign debt to suspend the payments of this debt for the period of the pandemic, to make sure that they have sufficient resources to devote to the health crisis. We understand that it's basically a first step. It's probably not enough to help these countries, but we think it's an important first step because all the G20 members came together in this, and a number of countries, 39 countries if I'm not wrong, from the developing world have already applied to this initiative and benefit from this initiative, saving some 5 billion US dollars already in payments that they should have already made. So we understand this is not enough. We are ready to do more, but we think this is already a first important step in helping these countries deal with the pandemic. I think somebody should mute the mic because I have a lot of return. Thank you. Then, as another big priority for the EU, it's the Building Back Better, so the recovery initiative. So what this means for us is that we should take this opportunity of the pandemic to really turn the crisis into an opportunity to promote green recovery, which means for us a recovery that it's mindful of the limit of the environment, that it's promoting low carbon emissions economic activities, that it's promoting renewable energy efficiency, all in the aim of fighting climate change and meeting the Paris Agreement targets. So for us, the Building Back Better, it's both a domestic agenda, so for the EU, but also an agenda for the world. And for us, the main frame for this is the 2030 agenda for and its sustainable development goals. So we are really putting efforts into helping developing countries meeting their objectives, and we want the G20 to live up to the task as well. So we would put a lot of emphasis on this at the summit as well. Having said this, there are some items that remain from the normal, let's say, G20 agenda that we will pursue this year, regardless of the COVID, because we think they are extremely important. Just to mention a few, we are very eager into finding an agreement on the issue of the digital taxation, which last year leaders have agreed to find a solution by 2020. The negotiations are going on at the level of the OECD, and we know that there are some difficulties, but the EU and all these member states are fully behind finding a global agreement by the end of this year, or at least making very concrete progress, because also our President von der Leyen was very clear in the State of the Union address that if such an agreement is not found, we will have to proceed with an EU digital taxation initiative that would solve the problem. But we would really like to have a global solution first. Then we are continue to push for a reform of the World Trade Organization that leaders have fought for in several summits already, and we see that the Saudi presidency this year in the Trade and Investment Working Group has made considerable progress, so we are happy for that, and we look forward at the summit to make further progress on this. And finally, I mean, I've already mentioned it, but it is really the defining challenge of this generation, and probably the main policy priority of the EU at the moment is fighting climate change and pursuing the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We know that this is not going to be easy because there are some countries in the G20 that do not share our concerns with regard to climate change. And we have already seen, you probably have noticed that some ministerials, the environment ministerial, the agriculture ministerials that have happened in the past couple of weeks in the G20 have not managed to produce a declaration, a ministerial declaration. So we see this, it's a very concerning episode, because obviously the sticky points and most controversial point in these ministerials is climate change, as you can imagine. It's not a secret. So we are really trying to push all our partners in the G20 to live up to the challenge of climate change, and to make sure that at the summit we unite behind the Paris Agreement, or at least all those that are still committed to the Paris Agreement unite behind it and make a strong statement in this sense. Now, to come very quickly to some of the points that you have raised in your papers, I think I would like to mention three. The first one is gender. So the issue of women empowerment, gender equality, it's for the EU, it's absolutely crucial, and we are trying to mainstream this in all our policy initiatives, and we will push very strongly for G20 commitments in this sense this year as well. We are participating to a new initiative that was launched this year, at the beginning of the year, called Empower, where women business leaders meet to try to find ways to promote women entrepreneurship. We are going to discuss how this initiative went in the next G20 meetings, and probably assess whether we can do more to support this initiative. We are also continuing to pursue the Brisbane targets, so the targets that have been set at the Brisbane G20 summit a few years ago, that foresee that by 2025 we reduce by 25% the employment rate between men and women in G20 countries. So at EU level, we are making good progress, and we show this every time at the summit when our data become available, and we are encouraging the OECD, the ILO, and all the international institutions to continuing their monitoring of the progress that we make in this regard. So women and gender equality, for women empowerment and gender equality, will remain central priorities for us going forward. The second point that I wanted to raise was about education. So education is basically omnipresent in your papers. You've mentioned it in many circumstances, and you attach rightly so a lot of value to it. And for us, this is also extremely important. As you can imagine, it's one of the defining feature of the EU is the Erasmus program. So when somebody thinks of the EU, probably the first thing they think is the Erasmus program that allows students to study abroad, and that shows the extent to which the EU attaches importance to international exchanges of students, which is one part of the policy. Of course, it's not everything that is needed, but it's a fundamental component. So we are working very closely with the Saudi presidency and with the future Italian presidency on how to further promote education exchanges and G20 policies that would help this. Just for your information, on 4th of November, there will be a high-level dialogue on education organized by the G20 presidency, to which we will participate. This is, for example, a very important moment also for you, for the engagement groups, to probably provide inputs to the presidency, to the various G20 members in view of this dialogue. We expect this dialogue to produce some documents and deliverables that might be then endorsed by the leaders at the summit. Third point, and then I will let you continue or ask questions if you have any. Another point that it's extremely important, and it's now today in the news, although being busy on other fronts, I couldn't really follow all the latest developments, but it's the issue of migration and refugees. This is also something that you've mentioned in your papers, and for us, the G20 approach to this issue, we have to admit, has not been sufficient so far. In the past few years, we have seen a lot of controversies emerging in the G20 with regard to how to deal with the migration and refugee crisis that have affected different parts of the world. Because here in Europe, we see the most clear example is the issue of the refugees coming from the North Africa and the Middle East, but we should be mindful of the fact that there are refugees also in other parts of the world where other countries are concerned by crisis and so on, and conflicts and so on. So it's a global problem, and we think the G20 should really step up its cooperation here. And so far, it has not done sufficiently so, in our view. because of the differences of opinions among members and the inability to come together behind an agenda. So we will push again for this. We are very glad that the OECD and the organization and the UN Organization for Migration are producing regular reports to the G20 on this issue, and these reports are very useful for the leaders to keep track of the trends and also to get like recommendation on how to deal with these challenges. Once again, our line, and I can say this, it will be the EU line, but also the line of the EU members of the G20, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. They will all be behind this. We will push very strongly for more action G20 level on tackling the challenges of migration and refugees. Hopefully, with the help of civil society that can push on their side, we will try to get something more done this year. But certainly for us, that would remain a top priority. So I think I've covered a little bit of everything. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. One last thing is that at the very beginning of the first session of the Sherpa meeting of the 29th, 30th of September, we will hear from some engagement groups that they have delivered their recommendations. So they will debrief the Sherpas on their outcome. I don't know if it's the case for you as well, but if it's not, I warmly suggest you that you ask the Saudis to put you into one session in the next meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasi, for this fruitful description of the EU policies and actions running right now from the Office of Sherpa in the European Commission and European Council. We are grateful for the insights you have been able to share about key policy initiatives that the EU is carrying forward in the G20 process. We will turn now to brief summaries of the policy recommendations that have been developed by our experts over the summer break. Time here will only allow brief summaries of these recommendations. The full output documents are available on the G20 Interfaith Org website. And I think it is fair to say that there are many areas in which the recommendations coming from our experts coincides with supportive of policy initiatives that Mr. Tomasi has described. We hope that there will be opportunities for fruitful exchange with his office on important issues in the coming months, as Mr. Tomasi said, maybe on 29th and 30th September this month. Let us now turn to the reports from the heads of the various working groups. We will hear first from Sofia Caseiro, who is a lecturer in the School of Education and Social Sciences of Polytechnic of Leiria, Portugal. She's conducting research into law and human rights law. She's heading working group number 1, Empowering People, Fostering Gender Equalities, together with José Luis Bazan from COMETSE. Then we will hear from Dr. Simon Slater, Director of the Policy and Partnership at Sustainability West Midlands and advisor to Science City Innovation Group and Energy Capital, who drew together the work on environmental issues, working group number 2, Safeguard the Planet, together with Roland Moore, Senior Director from Besan Wolf. And then, last but not least, from Professor Javier Martinez Toron, Professor of Law at Complutense University, Madrid, Spain, Vice President of the Section of Canon Law and Church-State Relations of the Spanish Royal Academy of Jurisprudence and Legislation. He is also a member of the Steering Committee of International Consortium on Law and Religious Studies. And he was heading working group number 3, Frontiers at the Intersection of Governance, Faith and Technologies, together with Professor Jonas Machado from Coimbra University. So we go back to Sofia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeta. Thank you all for being here and for this incredible work that has been done. I feel now increased responsibility after hearing from Mr. Tomasi, because our group was very into all the topics that were referred by him, and they are being prioritized in the G20 meeting. So I would on a first note, I would like to thank all participants and contributors of our working group 1. We had an eclectic group of contributors from religious leaders of different faiths, academics and specialists in several areas that our group worked on. Each contribution and comment were relevant to increase the quality of the conversation and to understand the other's point of view, which is the main goal we need to achieve in a forum such as this. It was, as I said before, a great responsibility to tackle this subject of empowering people and fostering gender equality in this changing society with the challenges that grow and are harder every day. The COVID-19 pandemic was a transversal thematic in every group that could not be neglected in any way during our work. And in our group, especially, the COVID-19 exacerbated structural inequalities that already existed before and are now very, very clear. And we have the responsibility to work towards their balance. So we tackled different subjects, as I said before: education on religious and cultural diversity, structural inequality and gender inequality, refugees, migrants, and trafficking, and the role of religion in peace building, conflict prevention, and mediation. We decided to include in our recommendation messages to governments and to religious leaders, considering religious leaders those who assume a formal position in any religious structure, but also those who are informally recognized as such in their own communities, because they also have this responsibility. We quickly agreed as a group that education plays a crucial role in these challenges, and that it is an instrument and a means that we should invest in to achieve knowledge, dialogue, and encounter between everyone, reducing these structural inequalities that are now very clear and that we found already in society. I would like to highlight our 5th recommendation on this topic, where we ask governments to actively create opportunities and conditions for open and constructive dialogue between politicians, religious leaders, and civil society, especially about issues related to social cohesion and the well-being of all, to identify problems and create concerted solutions. In our view, the creation of these spaces of dialogue and involvement is an essential contribution to social integration and cohesion, whilst helping the prevention of social misinterpretations and radicalization. Structural inequalities, as I referred, were exacerbated during this pandemic, and in our discussions we focused on what we could reduce in these inequalities, mainly through the more egalitarian treatment of men and women in the workspace. We acknowledge the importance of the role of the religious leaders in this thematic by encouraging, in our recommendations, that religious leaders should interpret their religion in such a way that it does not pave way for possible justification of any violence against women or girls. Another note that I would like to add concerning recent events, the pandemic, but also the fire in Moria, Lesbos, that left 13,000 people without shelter. We cannot push aside our human, if I may, responsibilities regarding the protection of refugees and people in need of international protection. As we assume to be protectors and promoters of human rights, we should strive for continuous actions of an improvement of policy regarding this issue, and this was very well underlined by Mr. Tomasi. We have to do more. It is not enough to say we care. At this time, it is important to show our care and step up in our responsibilities. This is why we recommended the governments to continue with their efforts to uphold the access to international protection, including asylum, taking into special account, of course, the vulnerable situation of unaccompanied minors, women and girls, and victims of human trafficking and modern-day slavery. Lastly, but not less important, we recognize the essential role of religion in peace building, conflict prevention and mediation. We found that there is increasing evidence that when religious actors are valued and engaged in a considering way, they can be particularly effective partners for the governments and for peace-building institutions. That is why we recommend that the governments and the religious leader to build bridges among communities and emphasize in their processes and by their example the importance of peace and reconciliation, including committing to this as a way of life for religious communities and not just a response to current challenges. On a final note, I would like to add that this work we have done with this recommendation in specific would not be possible without the openness of every single contributor in the process, which allowed us to engage in meaningful dialogue that I'm sure will continue in the future. Thank you very much for your attention and for your work.
Thank you, Sophia, for great work that you have been doing so far, and we hope you continue that way as well for the next G20 round. So we go to Simon. Simon, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'm very thankful for the work that Roland did in bringing basically 14 individuals from different faith backgrounds and different experiences in terms of expertise on policy, intergenerational and interfaith justice, and also environmental policy. And the richness of the discussion has been briefly summarised in the recommendation of the paper, but I personally benefited a great deal by, again, listening to different viewpoints and different perspectives, which really helped develop the policy positions. So it's a really interesting discussion and very common issues around safeguarding the planet, about agreement, common agreement about urgency of action, common agreement about how unhelpful it is at the moment that it appears from an outsider looking in that the current global system seems to be focused on economic growth, and that isn't very helpful when we talk about building a better future if it's the only thing we're focusing on. And also common understanding about fairness. Climate change and environmental impacts are unfair on who it impacts, which is often the poorest, and also how we make that transition, it's got to be fair as well. It's got to give people new jobs and new opportunities. So those are the areas of agreement. The main areas of disagreement were on the how, from some people saying, actually, we need a radical new economic system. This current system's not working. What can we do about it? To others that saying, we haven't got time to reinvent a new system. How do you make the system work we've got for us at the moment? So those are the main areas of disagreement. So when it feeds through to recommendations, really grateful that most of those seem to be already on the top list for the EU. One of the recommendations was for the EU to basically be much bolder and promote the fact that it already accepts that the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are the overall framework for progress, and to be much bolder about that. And so we hear more about that than just one of the goals, which is economic progress. So be bolder, be more consistent about that broader framework to say it's more of an economic growth, it's about the environment, it's about justice. In terms of the role for religious leaders, it was felt they could play their part by promoting the United Nations goals and that broader agenda at local level. What are we doing as religious institutions about the environment, about justice? And by the way, this is a global agreed agenda. The second recommendation to highlight is, again, already been touched on, it's the Building Back Better agenda. And there's a very strong feeling that in terms of the economic bailouts or economic recovery plans, there needs to be a very strong element of what would a green, better future look like, and also a fair transition. How's it going to help industries and jobs at risk making that transition? And since that paper's been published, delighted that it's been very strong progress from for the EU and European countries like Germany and France about what they're putting in their recovery plans. But the basic push there is to carry that onto the G20, say, for goodness sake, carry on building back better rather than business as usual. This is a huge opportunity to create a greener future. So again, that's a second sort of big recommendation. And the role of religious leaders was felt to be basically demonstrating that at the local level. How do we build back better in terms of the way we operate our institutions, the way we start delivering our sort of services and activities in the future? So doing our bit at the local level. So those are sort of the headlines, really. Very, very rich discussion, and absolutely delighted to hear from the EU's perspective that those sort of big headline issues about the UN goals and the recovery plans are sort of top of their negotiating list. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for this brief summary. The document is available, and thank you for stepping in the framing the final recommendations at the end of the working group on safeguarding the planet. So now we turn to Javier. I hope he can hear us.
I can. Can you hear me as well?
Yes,
okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I must say at the beginning, well, first, by the way, don't pay much attention to the background decoration. This is just a temporary apartment in Freiburg, where I'm based right now for a research project. I must say at the beginning that it has been a very interesting and stimulating experience working with this group. It has been easy, and especially, I would say, with the co-chair of the group, Professor Jonathan Machado, from the University of Coimbra, and also with Professor Maria Jose Valero from University Villanueva in Madrid. My view of the group work has been that on the very important topics, there was an essential agreement. So I cannot remember areas of particularly profound disagreement on serious issues. Our main concern, I must say, was how to compress a very large and complex set of issues into a document of a relatively reduced extension. Another point of our work is the relationship of this document with the COVID-19 crisis. We departed, of course, from the coronavirus crisis, but we tried at any time not to get obsessed with it. It was not easy for obvious reasons, but we rather tried to see in the coronavirus crisis an opportunity to identify issues that were of more permanent significance, that were particularly important for sustainable development from the perspective of the relations between the state, religion, and the civil society. And the document is long enough, so I wouldn't try to make a summary of it, but I would emphasize three main lines or ideas that constitute the structure of the document. First of all, the need for a better comprehension of the meaning and implications of freedom of religion or belief, and to explore non-conflictual ways to approach the relationship between the exercise of religious freedom and the exercise of other fundamental rights. And naturally, this includes rediscovering the notion of human dignity, which is at the base of all those fundamental rights, and also understanding that religion or belief are not only a matter of free choice. They are a matter of free choice, but they are also a crucial element that profoundly define the identity of many people on the planet. And this is something that is not so infrequently forgotten. The second idea or line is the importance to promote a positive language in the public speech by the main actors in our society. And we could describe with an awful word as the influencers in our society: religious leaders, politicians, journalists, scholars, intellectuals in general, etc. People involved in the media, in social networking, etc. We saw that we saw the need to underscore the use of a respectful language when referring to religion and beliefs in general, and especially when referring to people with different religions or beliefs. And the third line or idea that I would like to emphasize today is that, and in this regard, the COVID experience has been very, very revealing. How important it is to have institutional channels of cooperation between religious and belief communities on the one side, state authorities, and also the civil society. And in this reciprocal collaboration, two areas appeared as particularly important to us. One is education in the broadest sense and at all levels. Education understood in a way as a way to promote religious literacy, but also as a way to promote respect for people with different beliefs. And the second area is the protection of religious sites, of places of worship. Not only places of worship that are part of the religious heritage of the country, also places without a particular religious, particular historical or artistic value. Understanding that every place of worship or religious meeting is essential very often for the spiritual life of people of religious communities. And therefore they are essential for the collective dimension of the fundamental rights to religious freedom. Ultimately, these three lines or ideas converge on the need to counteract one of the most dangerous features of contemporary societies, which is polarization. Polarization which is often based on a sort of Manichaeism, which simplifies reality. And we can see that conflicts and hostility between people with different ideas are today too common. And in the area of freedom of religion or belief, the most worrying polarization is perhaps that occurs between religious and non-religious people. Often each of these sides tend to exclude the other as if claiming the monopoly or the key, the exclusive key to civilization. And so the other should not be listened to. Their contribution of the other would be irrelevant. I think that in this sense, every effort at the European level that is oriented to creating fora for meeting and discussion between secular and religious people looks like a very good idea, because we are persuaded that polarization can be very efficiently combated with real dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Javier, for this brief summary. Thanks to all of you for these very efficient summaries of much work, extensive work, and more for the leadership and hard work each of you have done with a larger group of experts who worked with you in identifying these recommendations. In a world rife with tensions, you managed to articulate balanced recommendations on key issues that are both relevant to religious communities and open to meaningful religious contributions. At this point, we turn to another important figure from the European Commission. Especially, it is our privilege to be able to have with us Dr. Vincent Depen, who is European Commission coordinator for the dialogue with religious and non-confessional organizations at the European Commission, established under Article 17 Treaty of Functioning of the European Union. Since he is the person particularly responsible to promote the dialogue between the religious institutions and the European Union, he agreed to respond to some specific questions about how G20 interfaith process can enter into dialogue with European institutions in the larger G20 process. He can perhaps address some of the recommendations we have heard in the process from our three speakers previously. And I have three questions now, so I hope he can respond briefly to each. First question is, how can the European Union promote institutional dialogue between religious communities and non-religious actors engaged in the G20 processes with and European Union? Vincent, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeta. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here to hear from you. I mean, I know that you had already a meeting with Vice President Skinas last June, and that there has been some dialogue already with European institutions, but I think it's very important that we are aware of what you are doing and that we can take this into account, that you also are aware of what the Commission doing on his side. I think Mirco described very well the overall agenda for the EU in the G20. And before going to this dialogue with religious organizations that we have at the European Commission and in the European Union, I think what was mentioned by His Eminence Metropolitan Emmanuel, and also by the last speaker, this engagement between the secular part of society and the religious organization, the religious institution, I think that's a very important point. And I think I fully agree that there is a false dichotomy there, and I don't think that you have really silos where on one side you would have the religious people doing their stuff, and on the other side you would have the secular institution doing something different. So I think the connection to me is obvious. And when we talk about the Article 17 dialogue, so the specific dialogue which was established under the EU treaties with religious and non-confessional organizations, I should say, which also the humanist Freemasons are also part of the dialogue we have at the EU level. So it's also a link between, I would say, the religious part of society and part of society which are more secular or see themselves are closer to secularist values. So I think we see it very much as a sort of continuum, that the Article 17 dialogue is also part of the wider dialogue we have with civil society. And I think, as Mirco said clearly, the G20 is seen as an intergovernmental process, for sure, but also as a process engaging civil society in general, including religious organizations. And to us, in the Commission, and also, and I think the Article 17 dialogue is really the best illustration of this, religious organizations are fully part of civil society. So when we talk with our constituencies, we need to engage also with the religious element and the churches which are present in Europe, across Europe. So I think that's really the background of this Article 17 dialogue. Now, of course, it is important for us to have this engagement with civil society. I think, like every type of engagement, and we will see it in the future, in the upcoming conference on the future of Europe. It is something, a future discussion we could certainly have. But I think in this discussion on the future of Europe, one of the issues we are facing at EU level in general is the engagement with our societies. How do you engage with people? How do you make sure that from Brussels you also get the feedback on the ground? So I think one of the difficulty in such a dialogue is that we have this, what we call the high-level engagement. So we have the engagement at political level with, at present is Vice President Skinas, Vice President Timmermans was in charge of the dialogue in the past Commission. So we have this political level engagement, which is very good and which is very important. I think it's very important to have this top-level engagement. We try also to have more technical or expert-level meetings on specific issues, and a few of them, and I think we can mention, I'm happy to mention a few of them. I mean, one topic which is obvious in our dialogue with religious organizations is migration. I mean, today, the Commission issued the Migration Pact. I'm not going to start to enter into the discussion on the Migration Pact, which was released today. But I think that's one typical example of a topic on which the input of the religious organization is not only it's not optional to me. I think it's really needed because it's a specific view. There is a great engagement on the ground as well. There are many of the people of many migrants, many asylum seekers who are also from a religious background or who themselves recognize themselves as part of certain religion. So to us, that's a very important part of that's one example. But it's very clear also that the engagement has its own limits. I mean, as any type of dialogue with civil society, and that there is room to improve it, to make sure that. And I think one way to do it is probably to choose. I just mentioned migration. Some topics, some issues on which we could try to have deeper engagement. I think there are other topics. I mean, gender equality is a very good example. I mean, in my own directorate where I work in the European Commission, we have a gender equality unit, and that's one of anti-discrimination policies of the Union. Historically, in fact, it's in the first treaties on the European Union, the equal pay between women and men, and I think that's still one of the. And we had, for example, a specific discussion with some religious organization on the Istanbul Convention on Violence Against Women, and we had some discussion on specific issue relating to gender and to the constitutional or legal changes in some member states. So we had that, for example, very specific discussion on this topic of violence against women. So this is another example, I think, of specific engagement we can have, and there are probably other aspects which are newer, which were mentioned: climate change, and this is the Green Deal that is being proposed by the European Commission, and that's an area where we haven't had so much engagement until now with religious organization, but it's really a new area where we need probably to elaborate more, thinking about not only the technical, economic aspect, but what type of moral or mental changes the climate change would require. And I think it's because it's a wide discussion, it's a deep issue. The same would go for artificial intelligence, where you have the technical, the very specific aspect, the very expert type of discussion, but also the moral dimension of the discussion. So these are some of the topics, I think, that the dialogue can, on which we can elaborate and go a bit deeper. Mike.
Thank you, Vincent, so much for that response, and we will try to be sensitive to that advice for the further engagement. Due to lack of the time, I will just ask you one more question, and I will skip the third one. And this one, it relates to the principal concern in our recommendations, which involve the problems dealing with various ways with the freedom of expression. How do you think religious communities can contribute to combating hate speech, fake news, racism, and xenophobia today?
Well, thanks for this question. I mean, I think it's a very very interesting point. I mean, also on how the dialogue can probably come in support of EU policies. Recently, the Commission has adopted what we call an EU Action Plan against racism. So it's really something. I mean, it's been a global issue recently because of the assassination of George Floyd in the US. So it has become a global issue, and it has become an issue for the EU. And it's not a new issue. I mean, the rise of racism, of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred, and we have coordinators dealing with anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred in the Commission. So we are already sensitive to these issues. I think one element I would note is that very often the religious people, I mean, it's at least speaking in the European context, it's difficult probably to be general, but I see people from religious communities, and I'm thinking about Jewish and Muslim communities, but not only, I mean, Christians as well, are more the victims or targets of hate speech rather than promoting hate speech. I would say at least the religious organization or themselves. Of course, hate speech comes from people from any very different background, so including people with a religious background. I think the issue is very much that religious communities have been in some way at the receiving end. But as I said, I mean, I think Article 17 dialogue should be related to civil society dialogue in general, and everyone in civil society has a responsibility on that. We mentioned education. It's mainly a member state competence, but the EU can have a role in promoting certain ideas, and I think the education element can be an important element. And when we talk about education, it means everyone. In fact, I mean, it means parents, families, it means civil society organizations. Some of them are really active on the fight against racism, and it means also religious leaders or religious organizations who themselves can have a role vis-à-vis their own constituency or vis-à-vis society at large. I mean, preaching by example as well. I mean, showing that there are different committees, different views, and that doesn't mean that you have to clash. I mean, this comes back to maybe this would be my last point. I mean, to the issue of polarization, which was mentioned, and I think the polarization of our society is the difficulty to hold any debate on any subject without clashing. The idea that you can have very different backgrounds, including religious, and still be able to have a meaningful conversation. You may disagree, you may not, in the end of the conversation, you don't agree. That's one thing, but at least you had this conversation. You were able to explain your own position. And I think there, the religious organization would have a role to play in this sort of, probably the education element.
Thank you very much for these responses. I believe they not only reaffirm some of the recommendations we have been making, but point to the importance of opening channels of communication and finding ways to work together in many of the crucial policy areas that have been identified in the G20 interfaith process. We hope we will be able to keep these dialogue channels open. And at this point, we want to shift to some extent and connect what has been going on in the European consultation process with the global G20 Interfaith Forum, which will begin in just under 3 weeks. With that in mind, let me turn things over to Professor Koldarum, President of the G20 Interfaith Forum Association, who will introduce our final two speakers, who will speak about Road to Riyadh and next year, Road to Bologna, Italy. Professor Cole?
So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who's been involved not only in this event today, but through to the European consultation through the summer. I have to say, from the overall perspective of the G20 Interfaith Association and from our partners, the KAICIID, which has played such a critical role, and UNAO's Alliance of Civilizations, and also our counterpart in Saudi Arabia itself, the National Committee for Interfaith and Intercultural Dialogue. From all of our perspectives, we have had a unique level of regional involvement this year that transcends anything we've been able to do in the past. And I have to say, as someone who's been very much involved behind the scenes, I can tell you that the Europe consultation in many ways has been a model. It was further ahead. It had more direct connections from the beginning with people who were working regularly with high-level policy actors. And so this has been extremely helpful. I think that you can sense just from the summaries we've had of the recommendations today that they have been very carefully thought out by some of the best experts in Europe. From my perspective, they provide very helpful focus on what are really huge issues and are difficult to pull everything together. But I think they will be extremely helpful as we go forward into the full G20 forum itself in 3 weeks. We hope everyone here will be involved with that. Extraordinary efforts have gone into preparing that, and I think it will be very worthwhile. There will be, well, you'll be able to get information on registration from the G20interfaith.org site, but also various other ways that will be discussed. Let me just say, just picking up on, we've been very pleased to have the representation both from the Sherpa's office with Mirco Tomasi. Thank you very much for your helpful overview, and also to Vincent Depayne. We're hopeful that we will have ongoing opportunities. As I listened particularly to Vincent Depayne, sorry, my French is not strong, about just the possibilities for places where there could be more in-depth substantive interaction. We should explore working on that in our context and partnering with you and your offices. That is appropriate because these are huge issues, and these are issues on which religious organizations, religious communities, religious actors have have much to say. It's a large and very diverse community, as Metropolitan Emmanuel pointed out, but it is a community, despite its diversity, in which the seeds of vision and moving forward can be found. And we're deeply committed to doing what we can to help that happen. Let me just say that as we move forward, we're especially grateful to KAICIID that has put extraordinary help and personnel and resources into helping with this particular summit. And with the forum this year, we could not have had the relationships with Saudi Arabia without the help of KAICIID. This has been a very interesting and unique year. We're very sad that we can't do this meeting in person. It would have been an absolutely historic event, bringing more people from more faith traditions than ever before to Saudi Arabia. And I know that they have worked very hard on being inclusive, and they are equally disappointed that we can't go forward in person, but the online version should be very rich, and we encourage people to be involved. We're going to hear now from Faisal bin Muammar, who is the General Secretary of KAICIID and has helped us from the beginning with contacts in Saudi Arabia. He, better than anyone, is in a position to talk now about the final steps in the road to Riyadh and what will be happening there. And then following him, and we will hear from Alberto Maloney, who's the UNESCO Chair on Religious Pluralism and Peace in Bologna. He's also the head of the John the 23rd Foundation for Religious Studies in Bologna, a phenomenally well-connected and leading intellectual in Italian life. We're extremely grateful that he has taken on the role of being the head of the local organizing committee for next year, as well as being part of our executive advisory council. So, General Secretary Faisal bin Muammar, let's turn the time over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cole. Thanks. I just would like to say to everybody, congratulations. You did really a tremendous work, listening to all the reports, and I know that from the discussion I had with Dr. Cole and other partners that we are really moving into the right direction. Ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that our partnership started for a long time. We started from Germany and then Buenos Aires and last year in Japan. This really, for us, it was an interesting journey because this is the first time, I can call it, we have this alliance of partnership to serve interfaith in its direction. The way we see it, the road to Riyadh, we at KAICIID, as the only intergovernmental institutions in this field, we were so proud to be among you, among our partners, to organize the final round in Riyadh and also to be part of all the regional meetings. It's the first time in the Interfaith Forum experience that we have all these regional meetings. So it's really amazing to see that this was really received all over the world, and so far we had more than 500 participants in our regional meetings. What we see is that we are so proud that there is an increasing awareness of the role of religion and interreligious dialogue, and also the way we see it to be closer to policymakers and to support policymakers in their field. what we see that through the United Nations and through the Advisory Council in the United Nations, and also through the link now to the G20, that we are having much, what you call it, room to serve interfaith. I would just not to take much of your time, but I can tell you since the end of Tokyo meeting or Japan meeting, we were working day and night with our partner to organize the meeting in Riyadh, physically, face-to-face. We did all the plan to do that, and we had all the support from the G20 Secretariat in Saudi Arabia, and even they contributed financially to host more than 250 guests to be there physically. Unfortunately, we were attacked by this hidden enemy, the COVID-19, to switch to virtual meetings. We are hoping that this event will end by as it started, and we are hoping that since we have a lot of acceptance from the invitees, more than 160 acceptance, that is really a good number to cover the different subjects. Yes, we are facing these difficulties within our deal with COVID-19, but it's really one of the things the whole world is facing. We are hoping that also we can convince the authority there in Saudi Arabia. As you know, we are an official engagement group, and our plan before we go to Italy, that if we can really submit a proposal or submit a request to hopefully to be considered as an official engagement group. We will do our best, we will support this, and also we are planning with our partners, Dr. Cole and the Interfaith Association and the Alliance of Civilization and the Interfaith Committee in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that we submit all the recommendations so it will reach the leaders of the world during their meetings in Riyadh next November. I would like to thank all of you, and I wish you the best. Thank you all.
So thank you very much. Let me just underscore that the number of 160 acceptances is basically the number of speakers. That doesn't even begin to touch the others that will listen in. So we hope that all of you will convey this news to others in your circles so that we can have as broad an engagement and involvement as possible. But now let me turn the floor to Professor Maloney.
Yes, thank you, Cole. Thank you, Elizabeta. Thank you, everybody, for this invitation. I'm very happy and honored to tell you something about how the transition of the G20 engagement from Riyadh to Bologna is going on. Of course, the experience of the previous G20 Interfaith Forum is a very valuable treasury for all of us, and we try to match all this with what can be considered peculiar of the return of the G20 in Europe and in Italy. As every multilateral event, the Interfaith Forum is a chance and a challenge. And mostly in an area like the interreligious dialogue and the theology of interreligious dialogue, the practice of interreligious dialogue, and the political consequences of interreligious dialogue. And for us, it will be important to underline to all the people that we hope to have. The most important Italian authorities have already declare their willingness to participate if COVID will disappear in the next year. So as we hope, but we cannot be sure of that. And we would be committed to explain to everybody that Bologna will be not a so neutral place for coming. As maybe you know, it is in Bologna in September 1096 that the first letter for the crusade did arrive from Pope Urban II. It is the place in which in 1410 Giovanni da Modena painted the prophet in the hell. It is the place in which on June 23rd, 1858, the Papal Guard kidnapped a boy baptized by a servant and transformed it in the famous caso, the poor Edgardo in the famous caso Mortara. But Bologna is also the mother of the place of natural rights in Western law and canon law. It is the place in which Innocent IV wrote the commentary on which the legitimate possession of their lands by the Native American was theorized. It was the place in which in 1741, Benedict XIV recognized the legitimacy of the first Protestant king, acknowledged by the King Pope, and it is the place in which some of the doctrines that are not part of Nostra Aetate was written and thought, and where was trained and lived a man like Romano Prodi, who has a meaning for the European Union and the enlargement of the Union. So to come to with the G20 in the alma mater means to come in a place in which there is something that we are used to do. It is a place in which every issue is treated with the infallible weapon of knowledge. And so what we'd like to have is not simply a way in an event in which we will have declaration concerning how peaceful religions are, because they are not very peaceful, to declare how strong is the commitment to life, because the commitment is the commitment of people like us, who are a minority in this planet, and in which the issue and the role of producing sound knowledge on the different aspects is important. So what we're trying to arrange with with the Secretariat of the Forum is to make room to all the workshops that are part of the structure of the G20 Forum, but also to find a way to make a step forward in theological and political terms. There is a statement of Thomas Aquinas in the Secunda Secunde concerning the difference of knowledge between angels and humans. And Thomas explains that the characteristic of the angelic knowledge is not when they have to know something human, because even the angelical knowledge of human is very human. And the human knowledge of angels is very human. So the difference is when something happens, and so you may know something per essentiam ipsius conoscentis, through the essence of the one who knows. And so this idea to find a way to root in very different religious tradition and the stories, in very different memories, blessed by discrimination and violence and blessed by dialogue and encounter. This could be the purpose and the reason to be so happy to welcome you and the European Consultation for the next year, and the guests of the so important Riyadh event who will take part in October in this migration of dialogue from one holy land to another land of knowledge like Bologna is. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think I turn things back to Elizabeta at this point. Thank you so much.
Thanks to everyone for their participation, not only in this event today, but in the work that has been done over the summer that has greatly enriched the G20 Interfaith process this year. I am biased, of course, but I'm particularly proud of the work that has been done in the G20 Interfaith Forum, European Regional Consultation process. I believe that we have done a remarkable work of crystallizing key issues in ways that will assist policymakers worldwide. We look forward to a very rich set of discussions that will emanate from the G20 Interfaith Forum this year. We hope that each of you will take time to register as soon as possible for the event. It will be important that you register in advance. The process is quite straightforward. And if you go simply to website of the G20interfaith.org, there is a button that you can click, and then you will be taken from there to the registration process. We hope that you will do so and that you will do everything you can to disseminate information about this series of events. We look forward to seeing you there. And until Riyadh and Bologna, stay safe and healthy, and all the best from Europe. Thank you all for being part of this journey. Bye-bye.
Thank you.